Most people think they know the story of American submachine guns in the Second World War, because the image that instantly comes to mind is the Thompson. Heavy, beautifully machined, with polished wood and the kind of presence that makes it feel more like a symbol than a weapon. The gun carried by gangsters in old movies and by heroic soldiers in war films. The gun everyone wanted to be photographed with, and the gun that history chose to remember. But almost nobody talks about the crude, stamped metal replacement that quietly took its place. A weapon so awkward and industrial in its appearance that American soldiers themselves mocked it when they first pulled it out of the crate. A gun that looked less like something designed for battle and more like a tool stolen from a garage. And yet, in the close, violent, confused fighting that defined the last year of the war in Europe, this ugly little machine became one of the most effective and most feared weapons the Germans ever faced. The story becomes even more ironic when you realize that the man who designed this symbol of American mass production and battlefield practicality was not born in America at all, but in Germany, as Georg Haider in 1888. A trained machinist who grew up surrounded by the engineering culture that would later define German industry. A man who emigrated to the United States in 1927, changed his name to George Hyde, and by the time the world was at war, was working not in an armory, but for General Motors' guide lamp division in Detroit, helping to design a weapon that would eventually be carried by American paratroopers into Nazi-occupied France and turned against the country of his birth. A twist of history that perfectly captures the global and deeply personal nature of the conflict. By 1940, the United States Army was watching the war in Europe with growing concern, because the reports coming back made one thing very clear. Modern combat, especially in cities, forests, trenches and night patrols, was no longer dominated by long-range rifle fire alone, but by compact automatic weapons that could deliver overwhelming firepower in a matter of seconds. And when American officers studied the German MP-40 and the British Sten, they came to an uncomfortable conclusion, which was that their own beloved Thompson, as reliable and as iconic as it was, simply did not fit the kind of industrial war they were preparing to fight, because it was too expensive, too heavy, and far too slow to produce in the numbers that would be required if millions of soldiers were going to be sent overseas. The numbers alone were enough to force a complete rethink, because at over $200 per gun, an enormous amount of money at the time, the Thompson represented craftsmanship in an era that demanded mass production. And in a war where factories mattered as much as battlefields, the United States needed something entirely different. A weapon that could be built quickly, cheaply, and in staggering quantities by the same industrial system that was producing cars, trucks, and aircraft. And when the Army announced in 1942 that it wanted a simple Sten-type submachine gun, Hyde's design emerged as the answer. Not because it was elegant or impressive, but because it was brutally practical. A weapon made largely from stamped metal, welded together in a way that minimized machining time, and capable of being produced for a fraction of the cost of the Thompson, which meant that for the price of a single old-style submachine gun, the Americans could now arm entire squads. At first, the reaction from the troops was almost universally negative, because soldiers tend to judge a weapon by how it looks and feels in their hands. And the M3, quickly nicknamed the grease gun because it resembled the lubrication tool used by mechanics, did not look like something you would trust your life to. And the fact that it was initially described in terms that suggested it might be almost disposable only made frontline troops more skeptical, since no soldier wanted to believe that the weapon he carried into combat was considered replaceable by the people who issued it. But war has a way of changing opinions very quickly, and once the grease gun reached the front and began to be used in real combat, its advantages became impossible to ignore. Firing the heavy .45 ACP cartridge at a slow, controllable rate, it was far easier to keep on target than faster-firing submachine guns, which meant that in the kind of sudden, close-range encounters that happened during patrols, ambushes and house-to-house fighting, the man carrying the M3 could put accurate, hard-hitting rounds into the enemy with a level of control that was difficult to achieve with other automatic weapons. And every one of those large-caliber bullets had a stopping power that German soldiers, accustomed to the smaller 9mm round of the MP40, experienced in the most direct and brutal way possible. When American paratroopers dropped into Normandy on the night of June 6, 1944, many of them carried this new and unfamiliar weapon. And in the darkness and confusion of the airborne landings, German troops suddenly found themselves facing an enemy equipped with a compact automatic gun that did not look like anything they had seen before. A gun that fired slower but hit harder, and that could be brought into action with terrifying speed in the tight hedgerows and narrow streets where the fighting often took place. And as the war moved into France and then into Germany itself, small unit reports began to describe the M3 not as a cheap substitute, but as one of the best weapons available for patrol work, precisely because it combined compact size, reliability, and devastating close-range firepower. In the end, the grease gun became something far more important than just a replacement for the Thompson, because it represented a completely different philosophy of warfare, one in which victory did not depend on producing the most beautiful or technically refined weapon, but on producing a weapon that worked, that could be built in enormous numbers, that could be placed in the hands of ordinary soldiers and used effectively under the worst possible conditions. And in that sense, this crude, awkward, almost industrial-looking submachine gun became a perfect symbol of the American way of war. Overwhelming not through elegance, but through practicality, not through rarity, but through sheer presence, and proving that in a global conflict fought by entire nations, quantity, when combined with reliability and intelligent design, truly did have a quality all its own.